Howdy, Buffalo Bart here, and welcome! Alright, as the title suggests, we're going to cover the different common types of actions you'll find on firearms. The last video we covered lock, stock, and barrel. Well, this will be the lock system. The mechanisms of how you're able to chamber around and fire based on the action type. A typical semi-automatic, and we're not going to cover fully automatic because, well, the normal average individual is only going to have a semi-automatic weapon. And realistically, you know, in video game context, games like, I'm going to call out a name here, The Division and The Division 2 are based off of, okay, you're an agent, you're out there in the city streets, you're fighting against evil gangs after this catastrophe, blah, 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 blah. And every bad guy you run into has got a machine gun, and there's machine guns everywhere. And, you know, very few semi-automatic weapons in that game. Where the hell are they getting all these automatic weapons from? Especially the one that takes place in, I don't know, New York City and Washington, D.C. Two very, very anti-gun states that it's very difficult to get hardly any kind of firearm. You've got to go through so many freaking hoops to be able to get one. It's just ridiculous. So where the hell did all these automatic weapons come from? So it's not very realistic. Alright, so that aside, this is also for you game devs out there that are trying to put guns in your games. You really need to know what they are, how they work, so that you can properly integrate them into your games in a more realistic manner. Alright, that said, moving along. Semi-automatic. You're going to have magazines on some. You're going to find that the magazine is what actually contains your cartridges. It is not called a clip. It is not called a clip. So what I've always called it, you've always been calling it wrong. It is a magazine. Magazine holds and contains your ammunition for firing. There are magazine sizes that go from a one-shot magazine block to 2 rounds, 3 rounds, 5 rounds, 7 rounds, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 32, 35, 40, 45, 60, 71, 72, 75, 90, 100. There's all different types of magazine capacities you're going to run into in the real world. So the magazine itself is your containment unit for your ammunition, and they're not always detachable. Okay, and even in examples where you even have like a bolt-action rifle that has a detachable box magazine, like the Lee Enfield during World War II, the soldiers were trained not to change your magazine and not to remove that magazine. You actually loaded it from the top just like a regular bolt-action with a enclosed magazine that does not detach. It's just the way they were trained. Even though you did have the capability of removing your magazine and placing another one that's preloaded into your weapon, like most people do with a magazine. If you're referring to something as a clip, there is only one clip type you're going to find. Well, there's a couple different types, but you're going to find a stripper clip, which is a preloaded set of ammunition, whether it's 5 rounds or 8 rounds or what have you, that are going to be on the stripper clip. It's a little thin strip of metal with grooves and springs on it to retain the ammunition in a preloaded state for rapidly loading the magazine of your weapon. The clip is inserted into the top usually of your firearm, and the rounds are then pushed in with your thumb into the magazine. So a clip and a magazine are two totally different things. So if you're referring to this thing that you can change out that holds your ammo in it as a clip, then you're calling it wrong. There's no other way to say it. You're just wrong. This is a magazine. Your magazine is what is attached to your firearm, which contains your ammunition, not a clip. A clip is a method of storing ammo to be loaded into a magazine. Completely different thing. So we're going to move on from that. So a semi-automatic rifle means that whenever you depress the trigger, it's going to fire one round only. There are, in the automatic styles, fully automatic, and then there's also burst mode, whether it's 2-shot, 3-shot, 5-shot, what have you. But those are burst modes or fully automatic modes. We're not going to cover those. Semi-automatic means you depress the trigger, it fires one shot, and the way that it reloads is based on the action type. In the semi-automatic type, what happens is the bolt will automatically retract to the rear, and it will strip a cartridge out of the magazine and into the chamber of the weapon, thus preparing it for being able to fire again. It also, as the bolt is going to the rear, it resets the hammer. The hammer is this portion right here. This is an AR-15, and you have the trigger and your hammer are the major components. You pull the trigger, it releases the hammer falls, hits the firing pin, which dents, as you'll refer back to the first video, it hits the primer, sets off the chain reaction, causing the bolt to go out of the barrel. In this case, in AR-15, you have a hole in the top of the barrel that vents gas escaping from the explosion when you fire. That gas is directed back through a tube called your gas tube. So this is your gas block in the front here. Notice it's not a very good diagram to go from, but we'll cover the AR-15 much later in another video just by itself. Okay, so the bullet leaves the barrel. The gas is chasing the bullet out of the barrel, but when the gas gets to this point right here, again, the gas is going to take the path of least resistance. So some of that gas is going to come up through your gas block, go through your gas tube, and go into your bolt, specifically on, this is an AR-15. It's then going to cause the bolt to be propelled rearward into the buffer tube, which we'll cover that in the AR-15 episode. And the spring pressure is going to cause it to slow down and stop, and then it's going to push it back forward again, stripping a new cartridge off. So semi-automatic is pulling the trigger, it loads a single round, it fires a single round, it resets itself, it loads another round into the chamber, and is ready to fire again. You have to release the trigger and then pull it again to make it go off again. So that is semi-automatic. This is a bolt action. A bolt action rifle is we're going to cover, these are going to be manual type actions. So a bolt action is going to require that whenever you fire a round, you're going to have to manipulate the bolt. Most bolts you're going to find, you're going to have to refer to your bolt handle here. And let's scroll over here. The bolt handle, which is kind of shown here, is going to have to be rotated upwards and then pulled to the rear. As you pull it to the rear, it's going to eject your spent cartridge from the chamber, and as you push it back forward again, manually it pushes another round into the chamber. Now this is the Lee Enfield type, as I was talking about earlier, and it does have a detachable box magazine, but they almost never remove the magazine for loading. There was actually a stripper clip guide right here. You place your clip on top, you push your rounds directly into your magazine. This is also considered to be, for this type of magazine, is a staggered box magazine. By that you can see that the position of these dotted lines here are your casings, we'll say, and as they go in, they're going to be staggered left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, or right, left, whatever. But they're going to be staggered back and forth. So this can be considered as a double stack or a staggered column magazine. A single stack means that they will be directly one on top of each other with no staggering whatsoever. So, again, this one, you see this is the firing pin that's going along here. There's going to be a heavy spring on that, and what happens is when you pull the bolt to the rear and then push it back forward, there's two different methods, cock on open and cock on close when you're referring to bolt actions. What that means is, in this case, this portion back here is the cocking mechanism. So as you're closing it, it's pushing it to the rearward, and I'll scroll down on this image here. You can see when you close the bolt, now this piece right here, which is holding the firing pin, is being held rearward with the disconnector or the sear that when you pull the trigger, it releases that or causes it to push this downward, releasing this right here, which could be a striker mechanism, which acts like the hammer, which forces the firing pin into the back of the cartridge and then sets off the chain reaction of firing the weapon. So bolt action is a manual type of action that requires you to physically manipulate the bolt to the rear and push it back forward again, whether it's a type that you actually have to rotate or what's considered to be a straight pull, which something for another video. You might want to check out Ian's videos for Forgotten Weapons to see the differences between, you know, like a regular bolt action or a straight pull action. But essentially, you're pulling the bolt to the rear and then you're pushing it back forward again manually to cycle your rounds. Even though this is a shotgun, there have been rifles that are pump action. And what happens is you have a pump handle here. Your magazine is actually a tube. So this is a tube type magazine. Rifles can have tube type magazines as well. Now they're very common in rimfires and they're also common in lever actions and pump action rifles as well. But most pumps are going to be like this. There are some that have detachable box magazines, but we're not covering that. We're just covering the basics. So the pump action itself is you grab the pump action, say you've just fired a round and you want to load another round into the chamber. As you pull the handle rearward, what happens is it pushes the bolt back, it extracts or removes the empty shell casing from the chamber, and then as you push it forward again, it's stripping another cartridge. In this case, it's releasing the cartridge from the tube magazine, allowing it to pop back into here. So now, with a little lifter mechanism, it also raises it up a little bit, so that as you push the bolt forward by pushing the pump handle forward, it will then load another round into the chamber. Now, capacities vary wildly from a one-shot magazine or a two-shot magazine all the way up to 10, 12 or more round magazines in the tube style. There's so many different variations, and if we do a dedicated shotgun episode, then we'll cover that. But this is a tube type magazine, so the primer portion is going to be on the back, and then the powder, and then the shot in this case. So that's how a tube style magazine is going to hold those rounds end to end inside the tube. Yeah, there was some issues with early versions of these for rifles where pointed bullets, probably not a good thing to do, to put the point of another bullet against the primer of the one in front of it or by it. Probably not a good thing. You wouldn't want to drop it like that. So you see a lot of like lever action rounds like the 30-30 caliber are actually not going to be pointed rounds. They're going to be a big round nose, so that they don't accidentally set off the primer of the next cartridge. And again, lever action here. In this case, the lever itself is going to be pivoting right here where this screw is, and this is going to pivot down, and as you pivot it forward like that, it's going to move the bolt to the rear, it's going to extract the other cartridge, and it's going to use a tube style magazine in this particular case here. Really common with lever actions is to have the tube style magazine that extends almost to the end of the barrel here. So you actually load this one here on the side, whereas the pump shotguns, you actually load it from the bottom typically and push the shell forward. In this case, you push it in from this loading gate here at an angle and then push it into the tube and it locks in place. So again, as you start to move your lever forward, what happens is it's going to make the bolt go to the rearward and extract the empty shell casing out of the side right here. And it's going to allow another cartridge to pop out of the magazine, use a lifter to point it up a little bit so that when the bolt starts going forward by pulling the lever back, it's actually going to push the lever forward and load another round in the chamber. So that's the lever action. That's a standard type of lever action you're going to see. This is a modern version, really nice version at that, but this is a modernized version. These things go back a long time, you know, into the 1800s. So The lever action's been around for quite some time. Break barrel actions, or single shots, double barrels, drillings. In this case, this is a single shot. This is just happens to be a rifle, even though it's got a really large barrel. It's a varmint edition. That's why it's got or a target edition. That's why it's got a really large barrel. So in this case, you're going to push on the lever here. The lever could be back here. This has got an exposed hammer. You'll also see hammerless when you're dealing with these as well. But in this case, you would push the button, you would break the barrel down. Everybody's familiar with the break barrel shotguns, where you break it open and you take the shell out, or it kicks out automatically. You put another shell right into the back of the barrel in a breech loading mechanism. You pop another shell in, you pop it back closed again. This being a hammer model, you would then have to pull the hammer down to what's called full cock position, and then you're able to pull the trigger, the hammer drops, it fires, and off you go. You won't be able to load another round. This is not a repeating weapon. This is a single shot version of it. But there have been more than single shots. We're all familiar with double barrels. And yes, there are double barrel shotguns and double barrel rifles. And pistols too, but this just happens to be a double rifle. A lot of double rifles will have multiple rear sights for different ranges or for different cartridges, because not every one of these are going to be the same. Say this 30-06, a common caliber. Say 30-06 on this side and 243 on this side, or 20 gauge shotgun on this side. It can be mixed. It doesn't have to be both the same caliber on both sides. This one just happens to have a rear side lever, so you actually would push that over to the side, which would allow you to break open the mechanism and either manually extract the two shells. You have what's called extractors and ejectors. And this extractor is going to extract. It's going to pull the shells out and then allow you to manually grab them, discard them, and then manually load new cartridges. Why would you want to manually do that? Well, the earlier ones, that's how they worked. They just pulled them out a little bit so that you could actually grab them and discard them and put new live rounds in. But also modern sporting shotguns for sporting clays and things of that nature, you don't want to just dump your shell casings everywhere. So what you're going to do is you're going to break it open. You're going to use an extractor. The extractor pulls them out a little bit so you can grab a hold of them. You take them out manually, put them in your spent pouch. You have a pouch that you wear on your side that you can put your empty shell casings in. So the extractor type is still common for competitive shotguns. Most rifles may or may not have the ejector type, but what happens with an ejector type is an automatic ejector. Say if you load 2 live rounds in, you close it up, you pull, this is a double trigger, double rifle. Some are set to where if you pull one trigger, it fires one barrel, and the other trigger for the other barrel. Some of them will be called a double set trigger, which means you're going to pull one trigger, is going to set it to a lighter trigger pull. The other one's going to fire it. And then you pull it again, it's going to fire the other barrel automatically. On ones that are just regular double triggers, you can actually bring it up and pull both triggers at the same time and unleash hell. You know, fun to do once or twice, but not on a regular basis. So with an ejector, what happens is whenever you fire both rounds, you open it up, it's going to actually kick them out. It's going to eject them from the chamber. So they're going to eject clear from the weapon, whether it's a rifle or shotgun or whatever. So the ejector throws them out, and an extractor just pulls them out. Doesn't throw them out. With an automatic ejector, if you've loaded 2 live rounds, you close it up, you fire one time, then you open it back up again, it's going to eject the one you fired, but extract the one you did not fire. So the one you did fire, that shell casing is going to get thrown out of the gun. It's going to get popped out so you can quickly load another one in. Whereas the one you did not fire only pops out a little bit and it won't kick it out. You have to manually pull the unfired version out. So that's an automatic ejector. Now, as I was saying, they don't always have to be the same caliber side by side or gauge side by side. There's also another type called a drilling. I'm going to show the front of this. And drillings can be in multiple different configurations. Some of them are able to be hot swapped or change out barrels or whatever. In this case here, you've got 2 shotgun barrels that could be 4, 10, 20, 28, 16, 12, 10, whatever. But you have, on this particular case, you have 2 shotgun barrels side by side, and the third barrel will be a rifle caliber or a pistol caliber. It's going to be, you know, a rifle or pistol round. So you've got shotgun and rifle combined into one. Well, what if you're on an African safari and you're shooting birds, and suddenly a lion decides it's hungry and comes after you behind? Well, you're going to kind of want something with a bit more oomph than a 20 gauge shotgun for shooting quail. You want something a little bit more potent, so you've got a rifle caliber. You've got a rifle cartridge already preloaded. You change the selector over from shotgun to that top barrel, and you're able to fire the rifle caliber. This one, you actually have 1 shotgun and 2 rifle calibers. Over here, all 3 of them are rifle calibers. They could be different calibers. You could have 22 long rifle here, which is a lightweight cartridge for small game. And then you could have a medium weight cartridge over here for medium sized game, deer, elk, you know, medium to large stuff. But then a bear comes charging at you, and you've got a 458 Winchester Magnum loaded in this other one, or a 375 H&H. So yeah, drillings will have multiple barrels, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 4. And they can be, in this case, this particular brand allows you to swap it out to different things totally. But you can change it out to either 2 shotgun and 1 rifle, 2 rifle and 1 shotgun, a rimfire and 2 centerfire, or centerfire, rimfire, and a shotgun. So there's all kind of different combinations you can get in a drilling rifle. Moving into handguns, you're going to have your semi-automatics, you're going to have your single shots, you're going to have a lot of the same basic principles of the long guns, including bolt actions and whatnot. But there's 2 main actions when we deal with revolvers. Okay, discounting the semi-automatics like your Glocks, your 1911s, your Beretta 92s, M9s, your Desert Eagles. They're not called Deagles. Don't get me started on that. So discounting the semi-automatic handguns and going to the revolver based, and yes, you can get rifles that are revolvers, you can get shotguns that are revolvers, but in this case we're talking about handguns. This particular case is the Ruger GP100 357 Magnum, 7 shots. Well, revolvers are supposed to be 6 shots. Okay, not anymore. You can get 22 long rifle and 12 shot revolvers. You can get this is a 357 Magnum and 7 shots. You can get 8 shot revolvers. You can get 12 shot revolver with 20 gauge shotgun, you know, Lamont revolvers. But in this case, just happens to be a 7 shot. It's commonly thought of that revolvers hold 6 shots, and not all of them do. The really big, powerful ones like the 500 Smith & Wesson are actually going to be 5 shots. Lighter cartridges, depending on the frame size, and it's going to be the size of the frame that goes around the cylinder, is going to dictate how much room you have for your cylinder. Your cylinder is what actually holds your cartridges. And in this case, a double action, the cylinder is going to pop out on the other side of the revolver and allow you to extract the shells that way and put new shells into the cylinder directly. But yeah, don't assume that, oh, it's a revolver, it's got 6 shots. No. Snub-nose revolver, well, it's got to have 6 shots. No, most actually have 5. And there are some that have 6, there are some that have 5. Well, they're either, you know, like 357 Magnum and 44 Magnum. No, there's dozens upon dozens of calibers you're going to find in handgun revolvers, from 22 long rifle, 22 short, all the way up to 500 Smith & Wesson, 454 Cazul, 357 Magnum, 357 Maximum, 38 Special, 9mm, 10mm, 40 Smith & Wesson. You can't just assume that a revolver is 6 shots. You can't always assume that it's going to be a 38, a 357, or a 44 Magnum. It's just not going to be the case. So This is a double action revolver. And what is a double action revolver is that you can actually just, the hammer is in the downward position, you can pull the trigger now, and the hammer will come all the way back, and then when you reach a certain point of pulling the trigger to the rear, it will get to a certain point and the hammer will then snap forward and it will then fire. And I can show an example later. I can break out one of my revolvers and show you an example of a double action revolver. I've got two of them actually that are double action, but that's only one action, but it's a double action. It's got to have two, right? So pulling the trigger is what you're going to call your double action trigger pull. Didn't make this up. This is the double action trigger pull. Means pulling it to the rear. It's going to cause the hammer to come back on its own and then snap forward when you get to a certain point. However, being that this is a double action revolver, you can also manually pull back the hammer and lock it all the way to the rear, and now you're going to have a super light trigger pull, and it's going to then release the hammer to snap forward and initiate what goes on. Revolver means that the cylinder portion right here will actually revolve every time you're loading a new cartridge in, whether it's 6 shots, 5 shots, 7 shots, 8 shots, whatever. It turns automatically as you cycle the action, and this area of a revolver is called the forcing cone. You see in movies sometimes where this bad guy's got a revolver and he's got a silencer on the end of it. It's kind of hokey bullshit, because anybody who shoots a revolver knows that you don't put a silencer, you can call them silencers or suppressors, it's the same thing. They don't actually silence the weapon. There's still going to be plenty of noise. But the reason why you don't want to, and you don't see real people putting silencers on revolvers, is because, well, all the gas comes out right here, right? Out of the muzzle. You said that's where the stuff comes out of. Well, all of the combustion, all of the chamber portion of a revolver is that cylinder. So what happens, you get that explosion, it's got to get to the barrel. So it's got what's called a forcing cone right here. And it's going to be actually a cone, and you're going to have to make sure you have a really tight tolerance between your cylinder and your forcing cone portion of your barrel. So that you can minimize. What's going to happen though is, if you shoot a revolver a lot, you're going to get a lot of carbon buildup on the cylinder and on the frame right here, because you're going to get gas and stuff coming out right here between the cylinder and the forcing cone. There's got to be a gap, and the bigger the gap, the more stuff you're going to get out of it. So you don't want a huge gap between your cylinder and your forcing cone. The smaller the better, as long as it's not physically rubbing and touching and interfering with the action. But with that, you're going to get gas and debris that's going to come out from right here, and you're going to get noise that comes from that right there as well. So it kind of defeats the purpose of having a silencer on here if you're getting noise coming from this portion of your weapon. There is one revolver that I can think of off the top of my head that you can put a suppressor on it and it work really well, and that's the Nagant revolver made by the Russians in the later part of World War II. Because what happens is, when you're cycling the action, it rotates and then moves forward and gets a tight lockup against that forcing cone and the cylinder. So you're getting a tight lockup there. It's pushing it against it, so therefore you're not going to get that gas escaping. And it wasn't, I mean, it's not common, but you will sometimes see a Nagant revolver that has a silencer on the end of the barrel. There was another method of silencing, but it was an oddball OSS thing from Vietnam. So that's the double action revolver. You have two action types. You pull the trigger back, it causes the hammer to come back, and then when you get to a certain point of pulling the trigger back, it's going to release it, it's going to snap forward, and it's going to fire the weapon. There's two main types of this. One is a fixed firing pin on the hammer itself, and the other one is going to be a floating firing pin here, and usually you're going to have a safety which goes up and down here, so it won't fire if the hammer's down, because there's going to be a block in between there that prevents it from smacking up against that firing pin and hitting the primer. Modern revolvers have an automatic safety built in, a transfer safety bar, but as you pull that hammer back, it's going to remove that bar out of the way. Um, so that's your double action revolver. A hard double action pull where it's a harder trigger pull, pulling it to the rear until you get to a certain point, snaps forward and goes bang. Okay. The other action type for this is to manually pull the hammer back and get a super light trigger pull, because it will move the trigger back as well as soon as you pull that hammer back. And then there you go. And a common one you're going to see from the cowboys, you know, six guns and peacemakers and, you know, all kind of different names thrown at the single action revolver, single action army, and there's Colts and there's Remingtons and there's hundreds of brands. What happens with a single action revolver, and we'll wrap this up, is the trigger does not do anything whatsoever until the hammer is pulled back. You have to manually pull the hammer all the way back. You'll hear a couple of clicks, 2 or 3 clicks, and it'll be all the way back here, and then you can pull the trigger, it releases the hammer, snaps forward. Again, older ones, you're going to have a fixed firing pin. More modern single action revolvers, you're going to have a transfer safety and a floating firing pin here, and you're going to have nothing but a flat face on the actual hammer of the revolver. But with a single action, you have to manually pull this back, and then you can pull the trigger. To load and unload a single action revolver, a typical single action revolver, I can actually show you a double action revolver. This is top break, which I own, which I'll show in another video. But in this case, this is a traditional style single action revolver. You have what's called a loading gate here. You stick your thumb in here, you put this open, it pivots open on most. This, not all, but most. This is going to pivot downward, and it's going to have you give you direct access to the back of the cylinder. So you tip it back, and then you have this housing right here contains a push rod and a spring. It's offset from the barrel so that it'll line up with the cylinder. There's a little handle right in here that you'll actually use once you've turned it. If the shell doesn't drop out on its own, you can pull that ejector rod out back, and it's going to extend back into the shell case and push it out of the chamber and allow you to drop it out. You can then let go of it, manually rotate the cylinder around to the next one, do the same thing, rotate it to the next one. So it takes some time for you to manually load and unload a single action revolver. Whereas double action, you can actually swing the cylinder out, push the ejector rod, make sure all your shells have come out of the cylinder. You can use speed loaders or moon clips, quickly load and close the cylinder and go back to shooting again. Jerry Michalik, watch his channel. If you need a link, check with me on Discord. I'll get you a link to his YouTube channel. He is probably one of the, if not still the fastest. He's held multiple world records on reloading and firing. He could fire 6 shots out of a revolver and reload and fire 6 more shots in under 3 seconds. Most people can't even reload in 3 seconds. Most people can't even fire 6 shots in 3 seconds. But he could fire 6 shots, reload a 6-shot revolver, and fire 6 more shots in under 3 seconds. Yes, it was 2.99, but still, it's less than 3 seconds. He had a 8-shot revolver that he emptied in under a second, and I think even a 10-shot revolver that he emptied in under a second. He shoots everything on his channel from 22s to 50 BMGs. I've seen him shoot a Barrett so fast that the Barrett 50 caliber M107, he was shooting so quickly with that 50 caliber rifle, that 50 BMG rifle, that you watch his trigger finger. From the time he pulls the trigger, it fires before the action can cycle, which is really quick. He's already tried to fire 3 more times before it was ready for him to go bang again. So his finger is faster than the action of a lot of firearms. He's really, really quick. So get with me on Discord if you don't know how to spell his last name, Jerry Michalik. I'm sure if you butcher it a little bit, it'll still come up. But Jerry is amazing. If you want to see some amazing shooting with a single action revolver, may he rest in peace, Bob Munden, M-U-N-D-E-N, Bob Munden. he was super lightning quick. I mean, some of his shots, his main trick shot that he was doing, he would take loaded with blanks, so it would be safe to use inside, but the blanks still shoot out particles of powder that didn't burn and could still pop a balloon at about 10-15 feet. He would have 2 balloons set up about 10 feet apart, 10 feet away, and he would draw and fire 2 times, 1 shot per balloon, and reholster in under a half second. It sounded like 1 gunshot, but he's drawn, fired twice, and reholstered quicker than you can blink your eye. I mean, he is just like, he was a machine. I used to have a silver $50. I've lost it over the years, but a silver $50 that he shot. He actually took a silver $50, threw it up in the air, and drew his revolver, a .45 Colt, full power loads, wasn't no mouse farts, so nothing light loaded. He drew his revolver, single action revolver, and shot the coin in the air, and I had a coin that he had shot by doing that. Really cool. Of course, all the videos that I had were on VHS of him. Thanks for YouTube and a bunch of stuff on YouTube now, but he passed away a few years ago. He was a big-time collector of single-action revolvers and shooter. He's a phenomenal shooter. Any of you old farts out there remember Sammy Davis Jr.? Really thin African-American actor. Great actor. You know, just gotta love him. But what most people don't know was Sammy Davis Jr. was also a collector of single-action revolvers, specifically antique Colts. Well, that's your trivia on that for today. So, that's your single action. Majority of them are going to be 6 shots. Competitive single action shooter society and competitive cowboy shooting, they only load 5, even though it is a 6-shot revolver, and they're safe. They still, for an added measure of safety, you only load 5 rounds. So that's your major action types. There are some others, some weird oddballs out there, but check with the Forgotten Weapons channel on YouTube and on full30.com. If you're into air guns, then airgun101.com. Phenomenal channel. Giles from England has put together his own separate video location there with a lot of big names in the air gun industry. If you're not into air guns, you think, well, it's just a BB gun. No, think again. You might want to check into air gun shooting and air gun hunting, because air guns are not just BB guns. You can get air guns up into the 50 caliber range and bigger that are quite capable of taking down medium and large game. Yeah. And if you think BB guns are, 50, 60, 75 years old, think again also. Do your research. Look at the Garadoni. I'll do a separate air gun episodes. But the Garadoni rifle was carried on the Lewis and Clark expedition, what, in the 1700s or whatever. But it was an air gun. It was a compressed air tanks that actually acted as your butt stock, and you could get about 30 to 40 shots out of one airfill. And I believe it was 40 or 45 caliber lead round balls in a tube magazine on the side, so you could fire quickly. It would take you about a second to reload, but you could keep shooting. It didn't make smoke, didn't make a lot of noise, but it could still bring down a deer or kill a human. There were air rifles that were used in the Civil War. So yeah, the whole purpose of Firearms 101 series of videos is to educate people to the realistic aspects of firearms. So I want to thank everybody for watching, and we will see you very soon.